Thank you everyone for joining the Digital RESI March Digital Health Investors panel. We're at the third day of the conference and our agenda is coming to an end. I'm very excited to have these active investors in the digital health space come in and share their perspectives on digital health investments currently. So we do have a very great lineup covering a lot of different markets, actually, from the US to West Europe and Canada. So yeah, thank you all for being part of this, and especially thank you for Jeff and Healthbox, who will be moderating the session. So I'll cut myself short here and then turn it over to you, Jeff. Before that, sorry, just one more note is for those who are just joining, we do have a Q&A feature enabled in this webinar. So what you are able to do is, if you have any questions you have to the panelists, please type those questions in the Q&A section, and the panelists, including Jeff, will do their best to address these questions during the discussion or save some time at the end of the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Claire. Yeah, as you mentioned, we have an exciting group of investors here. And I think what we want to do, as you mentioned, Claire, is kind of spend 45, 50 minutes going through a list of questions and get really the panelists' responses on those. And then spend maybe 10, 15 minutes on questions from the audience. So, how we're going to set this up is really get the investors' point of view on, what's going on in digital health today and where do they see the world headed. And then really dive deep into understanding how their specific funds work and how they operate and how they like to work with entrepreneurs. So with that, just a quick brief background on me. I'm Jeff Reese with Healthbox. One of the things that we do, which I focus on, is we work with DaVita, the kidney care business, in managing their venture fund. We invest anywhere up to, let's call it $10 million in mostly healthcare IT and service companies and some diagnostics as well. And we're stage agnostic, so we're investing in early stage, Series A, all the way through growth equity. But with that, I want to do as little talking as possible today, and I think the goal really is to let the panelists shine here. So with that, maybe we start with Patrick and just introducing yourself and the firm you're with.
Happy to. So thanks, first of all, to have gotten the invitation for this panel. I'm looking forward to the discussions. So Patrick Saboska, I represent Industry Fund, and we're the largest deep tech fund, including life sciences and health tech, in Northern Europe. It's a fund of $850 million US, and we're also stage agnostic, Jeff, just like your setup, which means that we back companies from seed to A rounds, but also continuously then. And we've kind of started off in the health tech space already some 10, 12 years ago, when I guess the term digital health tech wasn't really coined. And we took our avenue to backing companies that were close to pharma or provider. So those type of technologies have been the ones that we've been backing. And the early stages of digitalization and pathology, radiology, imaging were areas where we took our first bets. And now we're moving into, remote care platforms, chronic conditions, and all kinds of technologies applying into that space. Me, myself, I'm a data scientist by research training. I'm a serial entrepreneur in the health tech space. I've been on your side, many of you in the audience. And since 8 years, I'm more on the transactional side. And 5 years I've been now with this fund. So looking forward to this discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Patrick. Brenda, you're next on my screen. You want to give a little bit of background?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Brenda Irwin, managing partner of the Relentless Venture Fund. We're based in Vancouver, Canada, British Columbia, Canada. We're a small fund at this point, but growing with a new fund later this year, because one of the things we'll be touching on later is the thesis of our fund, which has been a focus on both the prevention and the management of life with the most common chronic conditions associated with aging, primarily diabetes, cardiovascular disease, mobility, and mental well-being. While 3 or 4 years ago, when raising the fund, that appeared niche, which was mind-boggling that was the type of feedback we were getting when raising the fund. Now everybody is looking to find places to put capital, understanding there are ways to measure preventative measure. There are ways to actually measure prevention but also from my perspective and our team's perspective, managing life with a chronic condition has been really underserved. And we have a small but buoyant portfolio. And one of the examples of the types of businesses we've invested in ranges from embedded sensors in total knee replacements to we have one regenerative medicine company that has 3D printed tissues in for both the pancreas and the liver that particularly pancreas, of course, are going to have a huge impact on type 1 diabetes. So that is a case of looking for managing life specifically with the disease. And then we're just excited about expanding it in some of the more chronic conditions that we haven't touched a lot on, more neurodegenerative diseases and musculoskeletal in the new fund as well. But while we don't call ourselves, we're not age tech, but we focus on diseases associated with aging.
Great, thanks, Brenda. And Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. Well, first of all, thanks to the organizers at RESI for inviting me to join the panel. Looking forward to the discussion with my colleagues here. I work at Debiopharm Innovation Fund, and we're the strategic investment fund for the Debiopharm Group. Debiopharm, for those of you who don't know it, is a pharmaceutical development company. And most of you won't know Debiopharm because we don't commercialize directly our products. We out-license them to large commercial partners who have a global footprint. However, we have a couple of blockbusters on the market, notably oxaliplatin, which is the gold standard for metastatic colorectal cancer. So we've been around about 40 years as a development group, and the fund is about 10 years old. Where we're focused is, currently we're focused on digital health and what we call smart data. What we're trying to do is we're trying to understand what tools are going to come along and help us become better drug developers, so help our core business. So there you could think of things like in silico clinical trials, for example, so simulation before testing in patients. And you can think of clinical trial tools in general. So that's one axis. And the other axis is understanding the digitalization of the patient pathway. So on beyond the pill, patients can have a lot of different digital touch points, some of which will be therapeutic, like digital therapeutics, some will be monitoring, some may be decisional support. So those are the kind of things that interest us. And we always try and look for stuff that's linked to oncology and infectious disease, because those are our therapeutic areas where we develop in our developing company. So in terms of check size, typically 2 to 5 million in a first round. We're usually coming in at Series A, so we like to be relatively early, but we like to see that there's some proof of concept, some perhaps late stage pilots or some early customers. I guess that's it in a nutshell. And as far as personal background, I'm a molecular microbiologist by research training, but I've worked for longer than I care to mention in industry.
Amazing. Well, thanks, guys. Well, let's just get into it. You know, all you hear about, and especially over the last 12 months, as we've all been sitting inside our houses, apartments, et cetera, is the impact of digital health. Brenda, I'd love to turn over to you and maybe just talk a little bit about what you're seeing currently in the digital health landscape, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted this space.
Okay, so Jeff, I'll start with just two data points from 2020 that I think underscore really, the most significant trends, and that would be the mega deals. So just looking at deals that and collaborations that we've never seen before. And one stat I have here is 14.1 billion was deployed in digital health in 2020, which was a 72% increase from the most active year, which was 2018 before. And that was very much because of the mega deals and then the liquidity. So from what I see, it's become very attractive. And again, coming back to even the thesis of our fund is being able to show when you're raising funds or doing deals, you always want to understand where the exit is. I mean, that's the reality for a VC. Or is there M&A activity going on? What's the public market look like? And another data point that there was 145 M&A transactions compared to 113 in terms of growth from 2019. And what that means for us as investors is not only are we going to be able to find great deals and investment opportunities in the digital health space, there is appetite and capital for both deploying into the sector and across the different themes that we're focused on. And also the liquidity is mind-boggling. And I would say that one of the things that we started to see in 2019 before COVID that just went over the top was consolidation. Like it's interesting dynamic, emerging technologies, but they're consolidating in a hybrid care model. So we had our mental health investment, you know, within 13 months of funding it, was acquired by an organization that was transitioning from bricks and mortar to add more technology-based hybrid care solutions through COVID. And I mean, I don't see that going away. I think the biggest challenge of what I term as the consolidators, and we've got in Canada at least 3 big public ones now, is how are they going to integrate the technologies and really create a continuum of care? You know, you can say it's a continuum of care until you actually have the patient experience, you know, providing feedback around it. And I would say the one other item I would share that's separate from the mega deals but linked is the large digital health rounds. So just, you know, my background, I didn't mention before becoming an investor in health tech, I come from the drug devices diagnostics world. So I'm used to seeing the big checks in the $25-40 million rounds to just get preclinical products moving forward. But you didn't see that in digital health. They were like little deals, like still proof of concept type. And what I think is a big indicator of the health of the sector moving forward is the size of rounds and the appetite to put capital to move health tech forward means these companies are going to be sustained to get to the point they need to, and they're not going to, and that's just a really unique place for health tech. I think that is really a direct result of COVID.
Got it. And good, yeah, really interesting, Brenda. And maybe Patrick, you know, are you seeing similar trends? And, you know, Brenda mentioned mental health is one of the themes, you know, that she invested in last year that obviously was a successful exit for her. But are there other themes that you're seeing in the market today that are just getting a lot of attention?
Yeah, maybe, I mean, to maybe give a little bit of European perspective to what Brenda said. I mean, I think generally we are somewhat lagging behind in terms of the really big mega exits and IPOs that we've seen over the past 18-24 months in the US market in this space. So I would say, I mean, what has really been the leading indicators are still kind of the telemedicine and remote care platform trend. So that's really been the bigger rounds, the bigger tickets, and where also a lot of tech investors have gone in, right? So that's a space where a lot of tech investors have put their bets into health tech. And if you look at what's becoming trends, for sure, mental health, there is an array of innovation coming in here across the European markets. I would say the next wave after telemedicine platforms, maybe going deeper into specific chronic disease areas. So we invested in a kind of what we felt was a white spot in severe respiratory disease with kind of a connected device and data-driven platform to support CF patients and IPF patients and severe asthma patients. So I think we're also seeing kind of a trend beyond the generalist GP, telemedicine platforms to go deeper and trying to solve the chronic disease management areas. And diabetes obviously has been an area where, you know, we've seen globally a lot of attention, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of dollars gone in. Another area that I'm actually, we've placed a few bets, and maybe Tom, you've already dug quite deep into this, is, you know, the disruption that we believe will come now in the R&D, so the pharma industry, the life sciences industry, and the application of AI, the application of, you know, 3D printing. There are so many different types of technologies that can really drive efficiency in the life science industry. But still, I think we're now at the verge. And I mean, a lot of reports have been out throughout the past 12 months, what COVID has done to the digitalization generally in healthcare and the global healthcare industry. And I think now this is a tipping point to go much deeper, for innovators and entrepreneurs to go deeper beyond kind of the more general digitalization platforms in healthcare. And that trend we also see coming now with deeper and more science-based innovation. And obviously we tend to like that type of innovation. So we're looking forward to the coming years to invest in back new companies.
Jeff, may I ask Patrick a quick question?
Please.
Just on the innovation and R&D and the reference to 3D printing, have you made investments in 3D printing businesses yet, or is that something you're looking into?
So we have actually, irrespective of healthcare, we did an investment in 3D printing space many years ago, and they are now active within healthcare. So that's the way we've learned this avenue. And we've also taken bets into digital biomarkers based on imaging technology within the R&D space, as well as patient matching in clinical trials. I mean, there's a huge trend globally towards decentralized clinical trials, right? And there's that's been a massive step forward due to COVID, because every trial needed to think through critically how to navigate their clinical trials. So we've learned somewhat from 3D printing, but for sure, I'm looking forward to see more.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree absolutely with what Patrick says. I think the the decentralization of clinical trials has been by necessity, and we've seen with some of our portfolio companies that had to do trials, they've been very much slowed down, which is, it's more acceptable for a pharma company than for a startup because you have a longer runway. But that's certainly been a big issue. I think from our side, we see more, as Brenda said, more later stage deals, and partly that's the consolidation, partly people are hanging on longer. I think the end game is having medically meaningful consolidated platforms, and that's going to take more capital, so it fits with the increasing round sizes and so forth. And from the pharma side, I mean, we could imagine a huge amount of disruption there, right? I mentioned in silico clinical trials. It's just the same thing in drug discovery, which WFM doesn't do much, but there's a lot of in silico drug design, target identification. There's huge amounts of stuff we could do to accelerate the pharma development process, which would be beneficial to everybody, to pharma, to payers, to patients. So it's a good way to deploy the capital, I think.
Super interesting. Well, Tom, I might want to stay with you as we move into just helping some of the audience members understand how to navigate this investment process. As you guys all mentioned, there's a ton of capital out there. There's a lot of investors. There's a lot of activity. But how do you could you maybe walk us through the different types of investors that are out there, and just how do entrepreneurs make sense of this market, and how do they navigate it essentially?
Sure. Well, I think for me, the world is simple, right? There's more or less two types of investors. There's venture capital investors who have more or less a financial objective, or well, they have a clear financial objective. There may be some other subtext going on, and there's strategic investors like us at Debio, who, as the name suggests, typically have a strategic interest. There's some people are in between, right? There's some, for example, pharma companies, funds that have a more financial weighting. We have a dual objective, which is to get returns to keep the fund going, not to invest off balance sheet for the rest of our lives, as well as a kind of learning strategic objective. So I think you need to think what type of money you want. I think VC investors typically are very focused on business case. They're probably tougher on the valuation because they have their LPs to satisfy, which is to say when they exit from the companies, they have to give money back to their investors. So that's just regular business for a VC investor. The strategics tend to be a little less pressured on the valuation, perhaps a little less pressured on the timeline too. But they bring obviously some other expertise. They bring typically technical expertise. But that could be a bit of a two-edged sword, right? Some people think that strategics scare off other strategics or scare off even strategic customers. So for example, having a pharma fund in your startup might mean that pharma companies were less likely to work with you. I think that's a little overblown. It depends on the situation, depends on the safeguards you have in place, depends on the actual fund. And then on the strategic side, there's as I say, there's a large spectrum, but some strategic funds need to have a business case, which is to say they need to see they can work with your company before they can invest. Others don't need a business case. Some are a little in between. We're in between. We like to see there's a possibility of working with the company we invest in, but that doesn't stop us investing. We do the investment first, and I think the as I say in French, the mayonnaise will take, which is to say that if there's a real interest, something will happen in terms of collaboration. So I think it's a little bit horses for courses. I think variety is the most useful thing. The boards I've been in, the companies I've been in, work best where there's a mix of strategic and pure financial VCs, because they bring rigor, they bring an eye on the exit. They're very good at business building. And then one last thing about the strategics, I would say, is that some strategics are building an acquisition pipeline. So they invest in your company with an eye to taking the company on board as part of their company. That's absolutely not our case. We're not an acquisition pipeline, but that's something you want to be aware of, because if you bring a strategic in that's going to buy your company 3 years down the road, that's a different equation to bringing strategics and VCs where you're going to build value together and exit some later date with perhaps a better value on your exit. I don't know, Patrick, you've been nodding a lot. You probably want to add something.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, and maybe it's once again a European perspective. So Brenda, would love to hear your perspective. But I mean, we haven't yet seen kind of the specialization into pure play health tech strategies in terms of closed-end funds. I think big pharma and life science industry, corporate venture arms, some of them have been very, focused within digital health or health tech. Others not at all. Oh, pure play biotech. But so my perspective to bring into this, on top of the stuff that you said, Tom, which is so true, is also the kind of mix of competency. And in Europe still, we have the division of like traditional life sciences investors who have opened up for technology within healthcare. And then on the other side, you have generalist tech investors who've kind of dipped their toes into healthcare, and let's see how far they go. And I think it's interesting to see those two blending together. And I've seen a few cases of successful blends of those competencies, because they are very different. And I think we come from different angles as well on how you go to market, business models. I mean, whether you go consumer route or business to business. And I think there is always that mix, and companies need to pivot because it's a tough environment, particularly in Europe, to get payers, which is most of the times public payers, to actually reimburse your product in one way or another. So I think there is a lot of learnings going on from the more generalist technology investors and community and the life science investor communities. And that's also another interesting mix to see how those people bring different learnings together to help entrepreneurs in this space.
Absolutely. I think you need both. I think, depending, of course, what your startup is doing. If you're going down a kind of medical proof regulatory route, you probably don't want pure tech investors and nobody else, because there's a lot that you can pick up more quickly with experienced people that are in the medical side. But likewise, if it's pure pharma and you're trying to do a B2C tech play, well, it's not relevant, right? Yeah. Sorry, Brenda.
No, you didn't interrupt me. I'm just thinking there's a couple of, because this is a recorded session, I don't want this to come back to me. So there's very specific examples I know of, and I've lived, where specialized tech funds, for example, AI tech funds, have seen in the last 18 months where the opportunity is in health, and in specific cases have come into health companies without a team or a knowledge base in health, but they know that it is the frothy place to be, and there may be potential for AI in the future, but there's like zero at the time of investment. So I've been watching the trends there, where biotech pharma type funds that have raised on that back have now started to add, we also do digital health, and they'll justify like backfill, I mean, in terms of why they make investments in certain companies. And then you have to look of, okay, is that helpful for the entrepreneur? And I can think in one particular case, one of the CEOs and entrepreneurs on the line will take this for what it's meant, or take this for what it is. And the quote was, well, I took their money and I am positive they really don't understand what we do. Right. And that was a very specific example of a specialized fund deciding to come into a health, like approaching deep tech health, but they had a lot of capital and they knew that the area was very appealing. And I'll just be general about it since I was a bit slanderous there. But there's absolutely constant, like part of my own personal entertainment is checking what certain corporate venture capitalists say in a public forum and what their slide decks say about, okay, where are you investing in now? Because they really are chasing the hot areas within digital health and health tech. And they didn't start in that place. And for my benefit, I see more co-investing opportunities. So the more funds that mention, well, we are interested in chronic disease management and we are interested in the prevention of diabetes, or, the general concept of chronic disease management will give me like an example of one of the investments we made was diabetic foot ulcer management. Like there's all kinds of products in terms of managing insulin, but diabetic foot ulcers are a massively underserved area and cause a significant number of amputations on a weekly basis. So we went chasing that company, and that company, as an example, had a very difficult time navigating the in and out of, they had a couple of Silicon Valley strategic tech, like the big tech groups looking at them. And then that got shifted to more of a wellness foot product kind of conversation. So they pulled out of the DFU, and then a corporate venture capitalist was looking at it. It's like people don't know what to do with it. They want to be involved, but they're not coming from a starting place of intention, right? That we are intending to invest in this area and we have the team and we've done the work. We're trying to figure it out. So, for entrepreneurs, I think when you're looking at, when you have those meetings with investors that are inbounds and may not make sense, there's nothing wrong with asking why they're looking at you.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Like it's a simple question. It's like, why are you looking at us? And it's a bit of a flip the script, but I think you'll be surprised with the kind of answers you get, and it'll help you make decisions if you have the great fortune of choosing who your investors are.
Yeah, so maybe that brings us to our next topic. Brenda, I consider the three of you all smart money, right? You all know how the healthcare world works. And for those entrepreneurs, looking to work with you guys, what do you want to see in terms of differentiation? Because, if you were doing something in mental health or diabetes, there's a lot of companies out there, but, how do you really kind of think through the noise, and what do you want to see from entrepreneurs to really differentiate themselves when they're kind of pitching to you for money? Patrick, I'll start with you. Go ahead. Yeah, you were nodding.
Me? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, happy to. And I'm curious to hear Brenda and Tom as well. But I mean, I think we're going after the same type of criteria. But I mean, I think in health tech, and particularly across so many different markets in Europe, I mean, you definitely want to make sure that there is a unique and differentiating product. I mean, there are so many mimics coming up in so many local markets that may work, and make benefit in those markets. But for us as a venture investor, I mean, we truly want to see that global scaling opportunity. So I think that's the first aspect. I mean, is it hitting a big unmet need? Is it really solving it? And I think what we build into, is it solving it? Is it solving it credibly and with facts? And there we want to see evidence. And obviously, companies we see are often at the starting point of that, but at least ambitious plan of rolling out evidence generation in terms of clinical evidence as well as payer-oriented evidence, because that's evidently very, very important. And I think the other aspect is really, how do you think about going global with your business? I mean, the business model, how do you think about partnering? What are your ambitions here? So of course that's incredibly important as well. I guess last is obvious. I mean, it's team, right? What's the blend of the competencies? We like to see a blend of technology, healthcare savvy, pay regulatory type of competences coming together. And now we see more and more of those types of teams. But also, I mean, those who have done it, or at least can orient themselves with advisors and a board of directors that really can help them. So, I mean, that's the absolute last criteria we look at. So maybe I sum it up there, and Brenda, Tom, chip in.
I'm happy to go. I think there's not much to add because you have a list of really the hot points for me as well, Patrick. I think it's one thing is being very clear about the problem. I don't mean you have to give a huge 20-slide deck about the market size. I mean, you need to be very specific about what problem you're solving. And this is surprisingly something that's often missing in first encounters with startups. So be clear that it's not a technology looking for a problem, but a problem looking for a solution, and that you have the technology that will be that solution. So that's, I guess that's the most important thing. And then the second half is, of course, how are you going to make a business out of it? As Patrick said, how are you going to scale? What's the business model? And in digital health, in various areas that we've been looking at, the business model isn't known yet. We know things that don't work. We can see technologies we think have real value, but we still don't know what the business models necessarily are to realize that value. So I think from a strategic perspective, sometimes you can invest in those because the technologies are so important for the future, but that wouldn't be very attractive to a venture investor.
I love going last, Jeff, because I can just fill in what I think. I can just elaborate what's already been said. So
my turn next time.
One point I'll add around the market and the reach. So I'm a Canadian-based investor, and we invest in North America with our first fund. The next one will be including Europe and Asia as a start. But what may be interesting for entrepreneurs is understanding the market that your VCs are coming from. So I'm in a public healthcare system, and I'm going to tell you right now bluntly that I'm looking at the American market, not the Canadian market. So, I'm not living and breathing in the US, but I know enough to know whether or not you understand your own strategy from a business model, from a payer's perspective. And I think that that's an important tip for entrepreneurs is when you're looking at the funds, it's a two-way street, but understand the market and don't dismiss the fact that I'm in Canada, that you just have to sell me on your Canadian strategy. And coming back to competition, I have two other points in terms of what we're looking at is one of my early conversations with any entrepreneur is, do you understand who you're up against? It's not my job to analyze your competition. It's your job. And unequivocally, it's the greatest weakness for most early stage entrepreneurs to understand what else is going on in the market, including emerging technologies and what I describe as alternative solutions to what you're working on. And it is a screaming differentiator for me when an entrepreneur can be very articulate around their innovation, but how it stacks up in the market. And one last tip around what I look at early on is the IP strategy. It's not about necessarily the IP that you have, but what you're working on. And it also comes back to the business model, the budget, your total fundraising need is we're investing as VCs in innovation. Innovation in health at its essence needs to have some kind of protective barrier, and it's not, know-how doesn't cut it. Like know-how is a nice to have and it's an add-on. But when I talk to entrepreneurs, and I had this conversation very recently with a company that we're looking to make a new investment in, and they hadn't really thought through the pricing of going beyond the US and how to start that now and make sure that by the time we get to the next round of fundraising, there's some substance to the IP portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with all those comments, and we'll talk about the investment process now. But a big thing that we spend a lot of time on is the team, and because you're effectively getting married, right? And there's going to be a lot of good times and a lot of bad times, and throughout that process, do you have a trusting relationship where you can work through those tough times? But with that, I think you get to know entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs get to know investors pretty well through the diligence process, and I think we're in a unique standpoint here where we have a strategic investor and a couple financial investors, and their processes might be a little bit different. So, Tom, would you speak a little bit about what your process looks like? And I know from a strategic standpoint, and then from Patrick, maybe you could talk a little bit about what a pure play financial investor might take an entrepreneur through.
Sure. So for us, we start with any opportunity that comes in through whatever means. Best things usually come from network, but there's obviously conferences which bring volume as well, and there's other ways. I had a colleague in HR one time send me an opportunity, and I was a little surprised by that. In the end, we didn't invest, but it was a fantastic technology he'd found in the Sunday newspaper. So never discount these things. So once the new opportunity comes in, our first cut is really quick. It's about fit. It's the most basic thing of fit. I mentioned that we're developing oncology and infectious disease. So if we don't see that the technology is in those areas or ever could be in those areas, then it's gone. And that we can do really in the first meeting typically. But there's a bunch of technologies that are in that gray zone, which aren't currently there, but they're planning to go there, and that needs a lot more thought. So that'll be the very first cut, I would say. So what size is the investment? Of course, I said we typically do 3 to 5 million. So if someone's doing a 25 million round, that's out. If they're doing a 1 million round, that's out too, because it's too small. And so forth. Then we take it, so things that get through that absolutely fundamental screen get talked about at our team meeting, which is a weekly affair. If enough of us like what we see, then we'll go on and typically have a call and have an extended deck from the company. And then we decide if we're going to do due diligence. Again, that's done within the team itself. And once you've got the due diligence well underway, and we're pretty sure we want to go ahead, then we're going to present it to our investment committee. And typically that would be a thumbs up, thumbs down if we could go to a term sheet stage. So we haven't finished all our due diligence, but we've done enough technical and business that we have a real good feel for the company. And of course, we've ticked that fit box. And if that's a yes, when we go towards a term sheet, then we have a final stage of due diligence, which is legal, IP, and financial due diligence, which is kind of just checking there's no skeletons in the cupboard more than anything else. Of course, when we do the initial due diligence on technical and stuff, we're also looking at the business plan. So it's not like we don't look at the finances before that stage, but that's where we're looking. Did they pay their taxes? Do they pay their employees? And do they have good employment contracts? Is the IP protected? Things that employees generate, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a double check, if you like. And then we should be good to go, assuming everything looks good and we're good to get to an investment. I would say the process typically is 4 months or longer. I'd love to say it was 2 months. At one time we did due diligence in midsummer in Europe in 4 weeks, but that's very much an outlier, I have to say. And that's it. Then we go ahead and we make the investment with co-investors, hopefully, because we're always looking to co-invest. And then we get dug in and start working on the board and helping the company grow value.
Great, thanks, Tom. And Patrick, how do you compare, contrast that process to what you do?
Completely different. No, I'm kidding. I mean, basically, it's very much the same process. I think we all investors are going through. So I think there are a lot of similarities. Maybe it adds some color to how we work, and maybe the difference to Tom's maybe global arena to scout for opportunities. We look, hunting ground is definitely Northern Europe. So for us, I mean, we're tracking a lot of entrepreneurs and we're seeing them early stage, just to get into the phase when we're closing up the deal. But that's a very good way for us, coming back, Jeff, to your point of trust. I mean, to build trust for those technologies and companies that we truly believe in, but maybe too early for us. We want to track them. And I think that's a process for us that allows us to be pretty quick when then we come to the kind of they're raising capital, it's a fit financially with the ticket sizes we want to do. We also spend quite a lot of time on thinking through how can a good Series A international syndicate look like? to really get a few pockets in with smart money at a round for a health tech company, we believe is absolutely critical, because they will be the foundation for further institutional investors that come in, hopefully, as their journey is prolonged. So we spend a fair amount of time actually to ensure that it's a good fit. It's a good fit with entrepreneurs. It's a good fit for us. It's parties that we like and work with, that may have complementary skill sets, maybe a corporate venture alongside with us as a financial investor, and so forth. So we try and sync those aspects before we step into the process that Tom diligently laid out. And that's very similar to us. We try and do it in 4 to 6 weeks, maybe up to 8 weeks if to be quick. I think that's our motto to the entrepreneur when we kind of firm up that this is a good fit, that we work through diligently those aspects and try and parallelize a lot of the stuff. Maybe a bit of other colors to what we try and do, at least when we're closing up the financing and the closing the deal, and the money is wired and the entrepreneurs are happy and can go and spend it. So we spend quite a lot of time when they are out the door with the money to also sync the shareholders' agenda, to ensure that, you know, there is a sync what we want to do, the longer term vision. Often, I mean, the cap table is filled with some business angels, some earlier stage investors, to ensure that, you know, this is a patient ride. It will take time. There will be dilution, but hopefully the cake will be growing much bigger. So all parties will be enjoying the ride. So we spend quite a lot of time on that. And maybe on top of Tom, we also try and feedback our findings from our diligence process and put that in what we call a 100-day plan. So basically the learnings we've done, so we don't only spend diligence money and throw that out the window, but bake that into the company and the entrepreneurs and the understanding, and then try and build that in, the learnings and commercial, the financial, the IP, all the findings we had. And I think that's been really helpful. And some entrepreneurs even see the value of why we're digging in so deep with diligence and spending some cost and money on that. So yeah, maybe adding a few more bits to what otherwise Tom described really well.
Yeah, super interesting. And you know, I'm personally interested in how the last 12 months has looked for you guys on really 2 dimensions. And I'm opening this up to the group. Really, how has COVID impacted your diligence process, right? Because no one can meet people in person anymore. And how have you navigated that? And then what we talked about earlier, there's just a ton of money in the market. And for example, I was talking to an entrepreneur earlier today, and I said, she asked, what's your typical timeline? And I said 60 to 90 days from, start to kind of close, which I think is a pretty typical process based on what Patrick and Tom spoke about. And she was like, well, if you can't do 2 weeks, there's so much money out there. We're just going to move forward without you. How do you stay principled when you see stuff like that as well? So I'd love to, open that topic up to the group as well.
Can I just respond to whoever that entrepreneur was? That way of dealing with you would have been a flag of, I don't want to work with you anyway. Right? Like it's one of those things where, okay, what is more important to you? And Tom mentioned the marriage, and I'm sure entrepreneurs have heard this before, but it really is a relationship business. So the biggest challenges in COVID have you had enough experiences even through these type of connections? I think you can get a feel for people, right? Like you can get a feel for people in 10 minutes and you just evolve from that. And I use the reference that a term sheet is a prenup. Now, are you going to marry somebody you've never met in person or seen their legs? Probably not. But but during COVID, we're making exceptions. And I'll just share one real example for me is you may have noticed me squirming a little here. I actually have a fractured pelvis from a bike accident almost 3 months ago, 2 months and a bit. And seeing how entrepreneurs respond to that in terms of, give me some time, I'm medicated, I've got 3 deals on the go. This kind of management brings out very, very special and very undesirable personality qualities. And so I would just say that COVID has put a highlight on people's ability to be human and whether or not you want to work with them moving forward, regardless of how great the opportunity is.
Couldn't agree more.
Mm.
And Tom, Patrick, do you have any other, before we move on to the next topic, do you have any, comments on entrepreneurs and going in as they go through the process, things that they should either, as Brenda mentioned, kind of avoid or do just to not to stand out because that's the wrong word, but to make sure that it's a good trusting relationship for the next 5 to 7, 9 years. Who knows?
I would agree.
There you go, Tom.
I agree with Brenda's observation. If somebody told me you've got to do it in a week, it's not. It shouldn't be a power relationship, right?
Yeah.
It should be collaboration.
Yeah.
There's valid reasons for things to sometimes be quick, but you don't have to present it as an ultimatum.
Yeah.
You can say simply, that you have a lot of other interest and people are on a faster track. And sometimes we'll say, okay, we can't meet that timeline. No problem, no hard feelings. Let us know next round. Let us know in time next round. So I think that's a good point. Although we have done some very fast things, within 10 days, 2 weeks, we've done an investment when external circumstances dictated. And I'd like to think that we kept our rigor. It was all hands on deck, everybody working on it. And, knowing that you're going in with what necessarily is less due diligence and less contact time, that's an additional risk that you have to offset against the additional potential upside.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, I agree. And I think being an entrepreneur in deep tech generally and deeper technology in healthcare and life sciences, you got to have stamina. You're in it for long term. And I think, at least for us, we're stage agnostic when investing. So we know that if we like a product, if we like a team, we try and be very honest in our feedback to them. And we like to see entrepreneurs, I was on the other side of the table, that listen, that reflect, and maybe come back. So for us, I think the attitude is really, if there is a good fit, there is ample of money right now in the market. Even the stock market is a big competitor to us as private investors.
Right.
And some take that route, but some do not succeed with that. So they come back. So I think we have a humble kind of view. We've been in the market for so long that we know that entrepreneurs will come back. And even, maybe they exit prematurely with the first venture and they come back with a different one, but they really want to do the 10-year journey and build that big value creating company. So I think that's one aspect. But then I think, we all also, we are on our toes. We know that, in certain instances, you just need to act, as you say, Tom, and we're ready to do that. But I think we don't want to compromise on our rigor. We want to make sure that we are the best fit for the entrepreneur and the company as well, because we're in it for long term. So I think it's got to go both ways there. So to your point, Brenda, if this is not a match, it's not a match. But I think we're open to that. Things can change. Circumstances around the product and the team changes. So it's interesting to follow and track these companies from early stages until they get the product out, how they behave, because there is also more humbleness coming. When you got to have a presentation and then nothing else, you may be very cocky, but then you start facing technology development, your first customers, and you got to pitch to so many new investors. And that's a constant journey for an entrepreneur who is in it for the long run in healthcare. That learning curve is very interesting to follow.
Yeah. And I know we want to get to some Q&A here. So if the audience has questions, please put them into the Q&A section and we'll get to them. But maybe just for a couple more minutes here, I had 1 or 2 more questions for the group. We talked a little bit about, how you go through, how you meet entrepreneur, or how entrepreneurs meet you, what it looks like through the diligence process. But, Patrick, I know you talked about a 100-day plan, but, each of you, how do you like to work with your portfolio companies post-investment? Is it really hands-on, or is it like, well, I'll see you once a quarter at the board meeting kind of thing?
So I can start because I already rolled up my sleeves. And this is generally
I like
why
it,
I
I like
do,
it.
what I show up when we're at physical events. So maybe you will see my rolled up sleeves in upcoming RESI events. Now, I mean, I think we take pride in really being an active investor. And that doesn't mean we step into the shoes of the entrepreneur and the team and do the operational stuff, but we focus on the business strategy, financing, and the key hires, and ensuring really that they can bolster and add senior team members and board of directors, advisors, the right kind of network around the company. But I think the strategy and the financing aspects, I mean, are super critical. And I think everybody here at this table, we know that there will be pivoting going on. So you got to be nimble. We're not a believer of this strategy will be the one to hold on to, but rather review that and alter and learn. So that process is utterly important for us. So we really try and roll up our sleeves and be active.
Same from our side, very active. Perhaps a slightly different angle. As I mentioned, we're talking about different VC types. We always take board seats. Part of our objective is to learn about the technology, so we need to be active with the company. So yeah, obviously strategy, but we also try and bring our expertise, our kind of sectoral expertise to the table. So with a new investment, for example, we set up meetings, we call them springboard meetings, where the startup company can ask us as a pharma company, and we'll field whatever experts are necessary, any questions they like. So they understand a little how pharma thinks about things that are dear to their hearts. And then we also set up collaboration meetings to explore, you know, with this new technology in the startup, is there something that WFarm could do in one of its development programs that would bring value to both parties? So we're really pretty active there. And then there's a whole lot of ad hoc stuff happens as well. And board-wise, we're super active in the boards too. And again, exactly as Patrick says, we're not to step into their shoes, but to bring some of the things we've learned in our years of working with different companies, seeing technologies develop and be commercialized. So also sleeves, my sleeves aren't rolled up at the moment, but that is our attitude.
And Brent, anything from you besides, you know, you got to be an active bike rider to be able to work with
Well,
you. Yeah.
I'll send you a story, guys, after the session. That is at the culture of Relentless is biking. So it struck hard when this happened. But I've even met LPs and done due diligence on my bike, and I'm not exaggerating. There's quite a climb close to my house, and I've had an entrepreneur pitch me as we've biked up the hill, and then he had questions. It's like, well, if you have questions, that we have to go down and we have to go up again. Like you have to keep riding if you want to do the Q&A part of this meeting. And it was spectacular. Like I just love that. And that's real for us because we're promoting engagement and healthy living, and all the things that we invest in are connected to that. The only thing I would add around you know, our participation post-investment, we're a small team, and I'm the only one at this point that would be joining boards, and I'm bringing 20 years of early stage board experience. And one thing I would say to entrepreneurs, and this is a very strong bias on my part, is you cannot underestimate the power of having proper governance set up early on with shareholders agreements. It's not discussed enough. And I find it quite surprising how many early stage entrepreneurs, particularly seed entrepreneurs, don't have voting and understanding the impact of governance set up at an early stage. And what I often get is I think, oh, well, you know, the bigger checks, the bigger VCs will come in and get that figured out. And I say, if you don't have that figured out before, then they're driving the bus. So like it completely flips the negotiation position for the entrepreneurs. So I know that, love it or hate it, I'm always talking about that at a pretty early stage with companies.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's a great point, Brenda. We do have a question from the audience. This might be Patrick and Tom's domain, but for early stage digital health companies in Europe, you know, what's your recommendation to how to finance clinical trials needed based on some of the new regulations that have come out, specifically MDR? If you have any comments on those, and Brenda, please chime in if you have any. But you know, for me, I'm US focused, so I have no input or opinion on this.
No, I mean, to begin with, I mean, we're actually, some are hating regulatory hurdles. I think we're actually seeing that as a good thing. I mean, we like to see technologies in healthcare and life sciences that actually pass those type of regulatory hurdles. It's a sanity check that you got your validation done, you got your clinical evidence, you will need it, honestly. So I think that's to begin with. It's a hurdle, but it's a good one. And we like to finance that, even though it sounds funny. I mean, honestly, if you look at the European ecosystem, it's quite incredible the amount of grants that you can go after as an early stage startup. I mean, just in Europe, you got the Horizon 2020. In the local markets, you got corresponding type of grants. So I would always recommend early stage companies try and go after that, foster kind of a culture of embarking on collaboration with a lot of potential investigators that you want to bring on board. Stay close to academic groups that are in your area, because you will need them. You will need them for evidence generation. You will need them to interpret evidence. You will need them to endorse your technology, maybe once it's in the hands of the physician or the patient. So you will need to stay close to academics, to experts in the field, irrespective of how you run it. Now, how you operationalize that, I think that's more up to what you're embarking on, whether you should drive the clinical research on your own, or you do it as a third-party engagement with investigating groups. So I think that you probably need to discuss on a case-by-case basis. But go after the grants, make sure that you gather that ammunition that is so solid in Europe.
Can't add very much to that, except that go after the grants that match your roadmap. Don't go after the grants just to be glamorous and have non-dilutive funding to do things you don't need to do, which
That's a good one, Tom.
can be a temptation.
I actually think success with securing grants is in fact a differentiator for many companies. For me, the fact that they have been able to progress and have non-dilutive funding before they've met in a meaningful way, it actually ends up being a differentiator for many companies.
Totally agree.
It shows hustle.
Yeah. Another question from the audience here. Do you guys as investors, for those companies that are headquartered in Asia that are, want to get into the US and or European markets, do you consider those companies for investment? Yeah,
from our side, I think it would depend where in Asia, because some places are perhaps more difficult to do business with than others. I'm thinking particularly of the kind of active role we want to have. If there's a big language barrier, a big cultural barrier, that wouldn't make sense. But for example, a Japanese company or a Korean company, I could well imagine that fitting. As it is, we don't have any Asian companies in our portfolio. We have an Australian company, but I don't think that counts.
And for us, I mean, that's an easy answer. We don't invest in Europe, but I have to say, I mean, we're at several portfolio companies have activities in Asia, and I mean, we've different forms and shape. In Japan, for instance, a joint venture set up with a local company. In Asia, in China, sorry, and a different type of route. So, I mean, in Singapore, we built a data partnership with one of our portfolio companies in their R&D efforts. So, I mean, Asia is definitely very interesting. And just on that point, we invested in a AI application in neurodegenerative disease. In Europe, this is, still a big topic, but funding and reimbursement is not really there everywhere. But if you look at South Korea, Japan, I mean, the age pyramid is very different. And they're very forward thinking when it comes to reimbursing preventative measures in aging disease, for instance. Brenda, I'm sure you've looked into this. So it's interesting. If you look at the global map as an early stage venture, where should I go to get my best proof of product in the market? I mean, in some instances, it's going directly to Korea, for instance. Maybe a good idea. And then finding ways to go there is, of course, the hard way, but you can do it. And we've been helping companies to do it. So it's definitely a good route.
Jeff, you're on mute.
I've been doing this for a year and I still can't figure it out, right? I just was saying we're at time now, but thanks guys for a great discussion. And I know Tom and Patrick have to get to dinner, and Claire, given it's like 4 o'clock in the morning where she is, probably has to get to bed. So really appreciate all the time and insights here. But Claire, anything that you want to cover before we end?
No, I think we're all set. No, thank you so much for the great discussion, everyone. And thank you to the audience who've been listening. Really appreciate it.
I have one favor, if I may. I do a lot on social media.
Sure.
Patrick, will you do your arms rolled up so I can take a screenshot and say something so it's your face, not mine?
Okay, I will try and talk as much as long
There,
as I can.
got it. Thank you.
Good speaking
Bye,
to you all.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, yeah.
All right, thanks guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Thank you.
everyone.